54th episode, a special Halloween edition of the Dallas Housing Coalition's Housing for All webinar series. I'm Austin Holmes, your host and a senior development associate at Dominium and a member of Dallas Housing Coalition Steering Committee. We hope you've enjoyed our mini series of interviews with our Dallas Zoning 101 Community Talk facilitators. Now we are back to interviewing Dallas Housing Coalition members and are fully booked through January with guests. So if you are watching and have not yet been a guest on our webinar, reach out to Brian at DallasHousingCoalition.com to get scheduled beginning in February of next year. Today, we are joined by Karsten Lowe. Karsten Karsten Lowe is a multifamily real estate professional with a strong track record in affordable housing development, site selection, entitlement, and the low-income housing tax credit. He currently serves as an affordable housing development manager at JPI, one of the nation's top multifamily developers, leading in site acquisition strategy, negotiation with public partners, and he guides developments through the entitlement process and ultimately through construction. He plays a key role in shaping JPI's national affordable housing approach and works closely with state and local stakeholders to advance policy and funding initiatives. Karsten holds a BS in industrial distribution from Texas A&M, where he served as the head Yale leader and a Ross volunteer, and is currently pursuing an MBA from SMU's Cox School of Business with concentrations in real estate and finance. Welcome, Karsten.
Awesome. Thanks, Austin, for having me. Excited to get into our conversation today.
For sure, for sure. I'm excited. Maybe if we have time at the end, you can tell us about how it is being the Yale leader and everything like that. Fantastic. So, to start broadly, JPI is known for its leadership in the multifamily space. How would you describe the current state of the multifamily market in Texas, particularly as it relates to affordability and investment trends?
Sure. I think there's really a lot going on. I would say over the last handful of years, it's become increasingly challenging to do deals. And that's for any number of reasons, whether that's challenges with capital markets, some of the political dynamics surrounding multifamily at large. And so we're kind of in this really impasse in a lot of ways. We've seen some great statewide legislation that is hopefully helping to swing the pendulum for being able to build multifamily housing, like Senate Bill 840, which is allowing for by right multifamily zoning. So those are huge wins where the state at large is saying, hey, we want to see a concerted effort and investment in multifamily housing. But then the pendulum swinging the other way, there's other pieces of legislation that are really challenging some of the constructs of what it looks like to pull together these affordable housing transactions with just the underlying use of the tax exemptions. And we've seen that over the last two legislative sessions, back in 2023 with House Bill 2071 and the PFC reform, which
Mhm.
sought to bring a lot of needed guardrails to the PFC program. And most recently with House Bill 21 reforming the HFC program as well. And so I would say in a lot of ways, we are still able to find ways to get deals done. It has definitely been challenging in light of just the underlying dynamics, but I'm cautiously optimistic about the forward progress and the trajectory of where the state's going.
Definitely. Yeah, that makes sense. And as my background is in affordable housing development as well, I think we're seeing a lot of the same things. And so, very curious about, your thoughts on kind of the future and some of these other items that we'll discuss. So, do you see a shift in developers looking to integrate more affordable workforce or mixed income housing into their portfolios? And if so, if that shift is happening, what do you think's driving that? And kind of what challenges remain as people look to incorporate these varying levels of affordability within their portfolios?
Sure. I would say absolutely across the board. I think there has been a shift in a couple of different ways that are really driving this need and understanding for a need of affordable housing. I think just from a big picture standpoint, people are starting to recognize that the need for affordable housing is not going away. The
Yeah.
reality is when we look around us in America, that for over 95% of American households, housing makes up the vast majority of their monthly budget. And so when you understand the amount of burden that housing places on families and residents, you start to recognize the need of having quality housing that seeks to address the varying needs across income bands is becoming increasingly important. But secondly, I would also say that really there's been, I guess, an attitude from policymakers, both at the city levels and at the state levels, and really at the national levels, to try and identify ways to incentivize development of these various income bands and housing to meet these various needs. And so, what we see, for instance, like in the city of Austin through their smart housing policy, is by giving developers incentives to find ways to say, hey, if you build with aiming to serve certain affordability bands, for that you can get density bonuses or you can get reduction in parking requirements. And we're seeing that across our portfolio as well. And states like California, up
Mm-hmm.
in Washington, up in Seattle area. And so when you understand that these dynamics are really trying to drive a policy decision into the underlying investment thesis, you
Mm-hmm.
can see why it makes good business sense to align yourself with these affordable housing programs. But then what I would say to take it a step further is, especially, I mean, and I know through the low income housing tax credit program, that has been one of the most productive tools in finding ways to create affordable housing at these types of income bands. I would say that the number one way that we create 30% AMI units and 50% AMI units is through the 9% low income housing tax credit program as well.
Yep.
And so when developers are starting to become cognizant and recognize the strengths of these programs and helping meeting these needs, I think people are really waking up to the idea that affordable housing isn't maybe what their old perspective would have been, that what affordable housing is today is still best in class assets. It's still quality multifamily housing, but it's
Mm-hmm.
just utilizing different programs and incentives to help meet the needs for those different income bands.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I'd love if you could kind of speak to some more of your experiences with kind of the messaging and explaining, kind of the different types of programs that are out there and the ones that are, kind of dominating in terms of creating that housing today and their differences from some of those ones in the past. You have experiences in which you face pushback because someone thought the program that you were trying to use was one thing and it really was another, and can you share that with us a little bit?
Yeah, I think in general, that's really kind of been the understanding is whenever you tell people that you're doing, whether it's low income housing tax credits or affordable housing or workforce housing, people have this, I guess, underlying perception of what that is or is not. And so the number one way we found to be able to dispel some of those disbeliefs is to
Mm-hmm.
really be able to take them out to some of our properties.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, JPI in our history for the first, call it 32 years of our company's history, was a best in class, only market rate developer, merchant builder. And so
Mm-hmm.
we had this framework, this context of we build best in class of whatever we do. And when we realized that we could take our same platform and go and help and meet a need with that, I
Yeah.
think that opened up a lot of opportunities. And so what that has enabled us to do is to go take these, whether it's city officials, capital partners, stakeholders across the board, to show them and say, when we say affordable housing, this is what we're talking about. And the
Yeah.
response we invariably get is, well, this is nicer than most of the other market rate properties we've seen. And so being able to show that in work product really goes a long way in helping, I guess, dispel some of those underlying narratives.
Yeah, that's huge, Karsten. And we do similar stuff. We work at different firms, but I couldn't be happier for you doing that sort of work. Because really it's a challenge. We're all kind of trying to get more housing built, and it's such a challenge, that narrative, overcoming that. In every new municipality you go to, it's such a challenge overcoming that narrative of what they might think whenever initially you say something like workforce, affordable, light tech, whatever. And so to have folks like JPI and I believe like my organization Dominium building really really high quality stuff. It's not overnight, but the hope is that over time we change that narrative and people start to really understand because it really is some high quality stuff. So
And I think
yeah.
that's a great point too, because when people look at the affordable housing industry and they hear of whether it's competitive housing
Hmm.
tax credits or that there's a limited allocation of
Hmm.
private activity bonds, people think that developers in the industry are just cutthroat competitors
Yeah.
to get one another. But when you start to realize that we care more about the same thing than that of which we disagree with,
Hmm.
It's great to hear when your other colleagues are being successful and find wins in certain cities, because a certain city that one developer opens the door and gets them to change their perspective on affordable housing helps set a precedent and allows opportunities to happen for the industry at large. And so that's been a cool thing to see. And you can, as a competitor, so to speak, be able to celebrate the wins of your other colleagues in the space.
Definitely. It's yeah, we're all trying to get these homes built. So
That's
yeah. So getting into, policy and partnerships, you've worked closely with both public and private partners. What kinds of local or state policy changes could help make affordable and mixed income development more feasible right now?
sure. I would say maybe we start with the local and then we
Hmm.
take a step back and go broader. I think one of the things that you can run the risk of in affordable housing in general is you have a wish list of things you want to see with various programs, whether it's just through the workforce housing program of what it takes to give out these tax exemptions, or where you want to see your low income housing tax credit deals going or not going. And I think
Hmm.
the risk you run from a policy standpoint, and as various cities think to come up with comprehensive policy reform, is trying to be overly prescriptive with the requirements they have.
Mm.
So much so to the point that whatever policies they're putting in place, whether it's various poverty thresholds, whether it's different issues with just how they think through, can a developer do more than two deals at a time for them? Whenever you come up with these parameters that
Mm.
restrict what deals are or are not going to get done in your city, can severely limit the ability of the city to realize the benefits of affordable housing. And speaking
Mm.
specifically to the low income housing tax credit program, right, that is really a federal program that is run by the state, but by you or the cities at large taking these overly restrictive policies, what that can do is you can say, you know what, we don't want those federal dollars from coming into our city to better our communities. And so I think from a city standpoint, one of the best things they can do is to understand what are the things that they want to keep as a central priority and what are
Hmm.
the certain other areas of their policy that they can realize, hey, it's okay for us to take a step back and work with our developers to craft the various deals they bring before us into the best ultimate version of the product that they want to see.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's a huge point. Particularly as you mentioned on those federal dollars. The low income housing tax credit, like you said, it is a federal program, and so there's a lot of misunderstandings and things that go around with it, but it's really important to message and to communicate with these municipalities that look, this Texas is going to be allocated a certain amount here, and it can go to your municipality or it cannot. And so it would be better if you are able to drive that investment into your community because it's coming federally and it's going somewhere. And so you can use it or not, but someone offers me something, I'm inclined to try to use it. So that's a really good point. I appreciate you bringing that up. Do you think you could just for a moment spend a second speaking about resolutions with no objections? I think
Sure.
that's a very impactful thing to the low income housing tax credit that I would love to talk with you about as well because I think that's a policy item that maybe is at the state level. But yeah,
100%.
yeah.
Yeah, and I agree with you 100%. And that's been one of the most fascinating things. As here at JPI, we're in the process of working on market expansions. Historically we've been in two markets, which is DFW and Southern California. We've been the
Mhm.
biggest player in these two markets and have done very well with that. But now
Yep.
that we're looking to expand into other states, one of the things we're doing is we're vetting and evaluating other states' low income housing tax credit programs. And that's been one of the things that's most fascinating to me, is this is somewhat of a Texas construct that we have. And in a lot of ways, for those who are listening that might not be familiar with the resolution no objection, is effectively it's another city council approval outside of a zoning case that gives the city the ability to, in other words, green light or kill a low income housing tax credit deal, especially it's for the 4% program specifically, which is already a non competitive program. The challenge with that is in an instance where any other multifamily developer or even us as a market rate group could come across a multifamily site and go buy right build housing there, what the policy of the resolution no objection effectively does Is it red lines around the places or the cities that it gives them the absolute authority to decide, do they want that low income housing, development in their city or not?
Mm,
And so I think that's a huge policy issue. And the irony in this is back in 2020 and 2021, in the wake of COVID and everything that was going on there was a moratorium placed on the resolution of no objection. And so what we actually saw is those affordable housing deals were done in various cities that they otherwise would not have been,
mm,
which in a lot of ways, we haven't heard any blowback about these have been a massive blight on the cities. These
yeah,
oftentimes they're like, oh, look, we got some nice new housing here. But
yeah,
it hasn't actually gone to the extent where people are saying this is going to ruin our city or do all these super negative things. And so to that end, I think from a policy perspective, the state should really take a hard look at understanding why do we have this policy in place? What is the issue that we're really looking to solve? And I think it also, going back to our point at the city level, for a statewide level, really dispelling some of those disbeliefs and those, I guess, misconceptions about what affordable housing is. Because that's really the number one driving factor of why I personally feel that cities want to retain their autonomy and trying to have the ability to kill some of these deals with the hammer that is the resolution of no objection.
yeah, Carson, thank you for that explanation. That's yeah, that is very, very important to for folks to understand, and to be talking, locally with your council members and everything about that. Like, hey, are you declining resolutions of no objections whenever they're coming up before you, And so because it's truly, like Karsten said, a decision about whether or not to have the affordable housing there or not. The zoning, and we're going to touch on zoning in a moment, but the zoning is not a question with the resolution of no objection. It's if you're past the zoning point, it's no longer a land use issue. It's no longer a question of does this municipality feel as though housing or this sort of housing or this density of housing should be at this location. That has been decided already. And so the question then becomes, are we going to allow it to be this particular type of housing that serves people of that lower income level? And so to say no to that is more so saying no to a particular type of person at a particular income level, as opposed to saying no to, broadly speaking, the type of construction, the type of use on that particular site. And so I appreciate you explaining that distinction.
Absolutely.
Definitely. So zoning plays a huge role as well. So as Dallas embarks on zoning reform, what reforms could have the biggest impact on, the supply of multifamily housing and ultimately just housing affordability for our city?
Yeah, I would say a couple different things is, and I think we've already started to see this with the Dallas City Council at large in the wake of
Mm,
SB 840, is trying to take a more forward-thinking, I guess, lens for what deals they approve or how they think through things, knowing that there are instances where developers could go somewhere else and go do some by right
mm,
zoning. And the city of Dallas at large has taken more of a neutral stance compared to some of the other cities in the Metroplex regarding that legislation. But I think what it has done is it has opened the door for the city of Dallas to say, okay, let's look more holistically at this area. Let's take a step back and see what would a development of this size and scale really do for just the improvement of the area? What would it do for the trajectory of, I guess, the underlying economics and the growth of the area? And
mm,
understanding some of those core components that are development considerations on deals that they otherwise, you know, could just kill outright and say, you know what, we don't want
yeah,
multifamily here. Now they can take a step back and say, okay, if they could go do multifamily here or they could go do it somewhere else, would we actually rather it here than going somewhere else? And if
yeah,
so, what are some realistic parameters that we can put in place that would make sense for this area and make sense for what we're trying to do for the city at large? And so it allows them to take somewhat of a more holistic and bigger picture stance on
yeah,
family as opposed to allowing it to become some myopic, NIMBYs, the
yeah,
clerk and turn, not my backyard, and allow these cities to say, okay, we know multifamily needs to go in. How can we plan for our supply accordingly to be sure that we're meeting the goals for these areas and using it as investment mechanism to encourage developers to come into the areas that make sense and
Yeah,
really try and help the trajectory.
for sure. For sure. That makes a ton of sense. So switching gears slightly to finance and innovative funding mechanisms. Just yesterday, the Community Foundation of Texas announced a new housing impact fund that will hopefully bring philanthropic dollars to affordable housing development. How do you view a philanthropic, effort such as this, and why are tools such as Dallas's Housing Finance and Public Facility Corporation so important to advancing mixed income and affordable housing development?
Sure. Well, I can start with the fund first and foremost. I think that is a phenomenal thing,
Yeah.
especially when you evaluate, what are the hardest things to get done in affordable housing? And more often than not, it's one of two things. It's either one, the deals are hard to have go in certain areas of the city. So places where it's cost prohibitive to build.
Hmm.
As a case in point, it's hard to do affordable housing in North Dallas. It's landlocked, there's small parcels. And so for that reason, land is really expensive. So it's very hard to do housing or affordable housing at large in those areas. The
Yeah.
second hardest thing to do is to truly provide deeper affordability.
Mm.
It's providing those 30% AMI units, those 50% AMI units. And so where I see some of these funds coming into place is really finding ways to incentivize development and help fill that gap, help fill the economic spread that's in place
Yeah,
to ensure that one of those two metrics can be met and help the overall housing stock of the city at large.
definitely.
But to your point on the PFC and HFC, and I think
Hmm.
this has been one of the biggest strengths of Texas in recent years, but it's also one of the biggest challenges of what has been under threat just from a state level perspective. And I guess to give more context to that perspective, when you look at other states and the ways they approach affordable housing, now mind you, Texas has a very high property tax rate relative to the rest of the nation. So our property tax bill is a decent chunk. But when you look at other states, they typically have these massive statewide, state funded affordable housing funds. And so, though their tax exemptions that they may give for affordable housing may not be as much in the dollar amount, they offset that gap and a lot of the times with these other soft funding sources, these
Hmm.
other means of filling the capital stack in the deal. And so, one of the beauties of the way that Texas has treated these tax exemptions is so long as you're operating under the Chapter 303, so the PFC, the 392 housing authorities, or 394, the housing finance corporations, you are able to get this basically by right tax exemption. And so that has allowed us to not be relying on just the annual state budget to have these dollars allocated and having to
Hmm.
apply for those funds. And so it's allowed us to stay nimble and work with the city to understand where they see that housing making sense and to
Hmm.
have them both partner in the economics of the deal to where they're getting the upside,
Yeah.
but also creating that housing in their areas and really just an economic investment and incentive. And so I think as you think about what that means for the city of Dallas and what
Yeah.
these two organizations at large do, I've heard a statistic the other day that I believe it was 76% of all of the affordable housing in the city of Dallas was created through the HFC and the PFC, which
Wow.
just goes to show the
Yeah.
sheer scale and the impact that those organizations are able to have. And so part of that is through the use of the tax credit program, but the other piece of that too is by finding strategic locations where they can invest in workforce housing. And so when you look at that lens of, I guess, how these organizations can leverage that tax exemption by providing still meaningful affordability for the residents, by
Yeah.
still driving public benefit by whether it's their ground lease payment or things of that nature,
Hmm.
they're generating dollars in investment back into affordable housing that now these organizations are no longer necessarily as dependent on the state for coming out of pocket and finding ways to sponsor affordable housing, but being able to have their own treasure chest to go continue to invest in affordable housing in their own backyard.
Well, yeah. No, that's huge. I mean, I had a friend from another state even see that in the industry as well, see that, the impact of of this new funding mechanism, this community foundation is going to be huge. Had everyone reach out. So yeah, no, it is going to be interesting. And Texas, like you said, has been a little different. We do have that tax exemption structure, but separately, we've been a little bit light in terms of soft funding and availability of that relative to a lot of other states. Something like this for Dallas would be great, but it does need, as you mentioned, needs to be paired with continued protection for the things that got us there, the things that built that 76% of the affordable housing stock in Dallas. We need to continue to protect those things.
Well, and I would be remiss if I also didn't say part of the reason why these exemptions are under attack the way they are, because that is the current reality of it. And
Mm-hmm.
this was true when they did the PFC reform back in 2023 and the HFC reform in 2025.
Yeah.
Is there were bad actors that were going out of their way to abuse the program in such a way that it was taking advantage of it and not really providing true benefit to the cities in which the housing was being built.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it is okay to acknowledge those abuses while still
Mm-hmm.
saying that these programs have been very successful in the ways of creating affordable housing in a long-term and sustainable method. And so I
Yep.
think both things can be true, where you can address the abuses while still protect the exemptions in place and find ways to be sure that we aren't taking a tool off the table long term. That way, Texas at large can still remain one of the most affordable states, and that leans
Definitely.
into our foundational principles of being pro-business
Yep.
and helping that long-term trajectory that Texas has been known for and wants to continue to achieve.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. We there have been some bad actors, and it's something to acknowledge, but we've got to remember the nuance, and make sure that we're looking at it from different ways, and still getting the good out of a situation, and then reforming and getting rid of the bad, because that's definitely key. And I think that your last point there was huge too, because so many folks in the business community in Texas really appreciate the growth of Texas. It's everyone knows that, whether you're living here or not, knows that Texas pro business should be affordable. It should be a great place to move and start something and get going. But it's even in the announcement for that massive investment, that massive fund that's going to become available, they had quotes from some really amazing economists who were straight up saying, look, we have to make sure that we keep Texas affordable, because that's a big piece of what is driving that growth. So many companies are doing the relocation. So many folks are feeling able to take that risk and start a business. So many people are deciding to, hey, I'm gonna pick up my family and move there because there's all that opportunity. So the underpinning thing for so much of that is that affordable environment where you can kind of get things done and have a good life. And so we've got to remember that that's a huge piece of what has been a big part of the Texas success story. So yeah,
Absolutely.
definitely. So looking ahead a little bit, as someone who's going to shape JPI's national affordable housing approach, where do you see the biggest opportunities for innovations in the next few years? Is it design, how the developments are delivered, the different financing structures, new partnerships? What are your thoughts on kind of the next things we're going to see to innovate and push the envelope a bit on doing some more affordable housing for JPI?
Sure. Yeah, what I could say there is actually, as a company, we have been taking a holistic approach. For those that are not aware, we are a fully integrated developer, general contractor, and we've even recently brought our own architect in house as well.
Mm,
And so, a big part of what we're doing is we're taking a step back on the construction industry at large.
mhm.
And when you look at things like automobile manufacturing, the efficiency in which they could build cars, the cost in which it costs to do so has continued to go down.
Yeah.
Whereas in construction, the costs have only gone up, labor productivity has gone down, and there has been basically the lowest rate of innovation and leveraging technology out of just about any industry short of agricultural and hunting. And so
Mm,
when you realize that, where the top of that spectrum is software development and is things like aerospace,
Yeah.
But in construction, which makes up the lion's share of America's GDP, has not seen that level of change. We realize that there's a huge opportunity here to take some of those foundational principles and leverage it in how we think about construction in general. So much so that we're using basically a whole attitude towards construction where we're breaking things down. And this comes from really industrial engineering space. And, Toyota did a lot of this in their manufacturing methods, but what we're calling tact planning and things
Mm,
like that, where we are breaking up each of our buildings into these smaller chunks, these smaller components,
okay.
and leveraging different insights throughout our construction process. And
Mm,
so far through just, originally our construction schedules were 3 to 4,000 line items originally.
mm,
Now we're anywhere from 16 to 18,000 different steps in the construction timeline process that we've built that schedule out to. And what
mm.
we've found in our timelines is that we've been able to shorten our construction delivery and overall timeline by 30% across the board, which is
Wow.
huge, huge amount in just savings and
Yeah.
huge amount in just overall time it takes to get units on the ground. And so I think as we think through construction and we think through some of these innovations and things that we're doing here, uh, it really enables us to go have these conversations with cities. And, one of the things that even from like a neighborhood standpoint, they say,
Yeah.
well, we don't want a job, under construction, pouring concrete and all these hours and machinery running for the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
And under times of old, that would be a fair statement. But we could now say, well, that time that we're working heavy machinery is now only 2 to 3 months where it's
Yeah.
loud, it might wake you up. But reframing some of those conversations and showing the benefits that we can do by building better, building faster, building with higher quality,
Yeah.
it helps with the overall mission of what we're trying to do on the front end, which is to find ways to create affordable housing.
Definitely. That's huge. That's really, really cool. There's a lot of innovation needed and still to come for sure in our industry. I might even give agriculture an edge a little bit, some of the genetic stuff they've done. And
That's
so,
right.
yeah, I think it very much is ripe for innovation. We do need to learn ways to get costs down, build faster, be more efficient. So it's really awesome that y'all are doing that. So, finally, here we're about at the end, but very relevant question still. Have you gotten your ticket to DHC's second annual housing summit yet?
So I actually am finishing up my registration as we speak, but will
Let's go.
be there. And so fired up about that. That should be a great time. So
That's awesome.
it's
What are you
it's
most
gonna
looking forward to about the event?
one of the things I love just about really these events in general is the way that you get to just connect with other colleagues and peers such
Hmm.
as yourself and hear about what's going on because that real-time insight from other stakeholders in the industry helps give you real-time business insights to think about where should you be focusing your time, effort, and energy on your practices and take away lessons learned from other groups. And so whether it's gaining perspective on things like that impact fund or having, you know, dialogues with other developers, getting to meet different officials from various cities, I think it is some of the most productive time you can have of being able to go have just these quality, constructive uh, times where you can really, I guess, get the most bang for your buck in the conversations you're having.
That's huge. I mean, I echo all of that. It's just really exciting to be able to talk with folks, and sit down and just learn from them. That so everyone sees different things, and so you got to talk about it to get anything done, to figure anything out. So it's a really good opportunity, and excited to see you there. I'm excited to see a lot of other folks there as well. So it should be
Yeah,
a
man, it's
should be
gonna
a
be a
good
great
one.
time.
Definitely, definitely. Well, Karsten, thank you again for joining us this morning. Your passion for affordable housing, and your commitment to public-private partnerships to provide housing for Texans is huge. And we thank you for it, and it shows through, and really appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me, Austin. Really enjoyed our conversation.
Definitely. So before we sign off today, we would like to encourage you to check out Dallas Housing Coalition's upcoming events on our website, including our Final Four Zoning 101 community talks. And as we mentioned, our second annual housing summit that is going down on November the 21st. And also our inaugural resident housing summit that is happening on November the 22nd. Follow our social media for more updates and stay connected with our Housing for All webinar series. Please also visit our website, dallashousingcoalition.com, to subscribe to our communications and become a member of the coalition today. To our viewers, thank you for tuning in for the 54th edition of the Housing for All webinar, where we discuss whether Dallas is big and if it is truly big enough for everyone. Have a happy